Okay, so what are these conversations meant to be? I was showing a number of the topics that we addressed. Every month we address a different topic. We try to use these occasions to open up new research avenues, to connect with other departments and colleges at the university, to external partners. We try to look at, current topics, challenging topics for design from different perspectives. So usually we have people in the panels that come from different backgrounds, different contexts, so that we have a discussion around new and interesting topics. Nowadays is about rest, reflection, and well-being, and I just leave the stage to Laura Forlano that's moderating, and I'm happy to see Sheila Pontis again with us for this conversation. Thank you very much again for coming, and yeah, take it away.
Great. So now we're going to share some slides on this computer. But
share yours.
Thank you all for coming. Sheila and I are kind of co-facilitating this workshop. And
I'm sharing, but it's not here.
Is that it? See, that's just the okay. So we're going to have essentially two parts of the workshop, and one is we're going to show some things, and that part is fine for recording by the Center for Design as well as by anyone. And then the second part is more you are going to be doing something, and that part we are not going to be recording because we want it to be an open atmosphere. Yeah.
We also welcome questions, comments. We would like this to be a conversation. Otherwise, we can be talking for 3 hours. And the goal is for this moment for results to be for you guys to be able to have some answers about questions that you might be thinking about for the first 21 days of the year, or maybe for many years. So I don't know, I'll just go quickly through today. So we are going to do some short introduction for those who don't know who we are, and then just provide some context about what this will be, what specifically you're going to be talking about that. But the main part of the workshop, we would like to be 2 activities. Let's see how far we can go. So we can give you time for you guys to reflect a little bit about some context we are going to discuss, some show and tell for those who feel comfortable sharing, and then some key points for you to take home and start hopefully practicing after this.
Yeah. All right, so I'm Laura Forlano. I'm a professor in art and design and communication studies here at Northeastern. And I also run a group called the Critical Futures Lab together with 2 wonderful postdocs and a number of PhD students. You can see the picture on the left is from a recent presentation I gave where I've started to use some performance techniques in order to try to communicate the emotional experience of living with a medical device. And so that's from a recent performance, which I also gave at the ISDR conference in Taipei last December. And then you see a picture of the Cyborg book, which has a very particular understanding of thinking about technology from a feminist technoscience perspective. So that's something, one of my written works that you can check out. And so that's just a brief introduction about me. And I identify as disabled. I am type 1 diabetic, and I live with a medical device and sensor system, and I might talk about that a little bit later as well.
Okay. So for those who don't know me, I'm Sheila Pontis. I used to be working here at Northeastern. I'm a designer by training. I've been in higher education for 25 years. And probably in the last 2, I have started changing my career to focus more specifically on the connection between imagination, well-being, and happiness, specifically focusing on optimism and how can we adopt imagination as a way of living, as a mindset, and how can that impact different aspects of life. And I'm focusing more on working with individuals and communities, and also training educators so they can start integrating this kind of way of living and being in different areas of life, not only the creative arts or design, but any different disciplines. And I'm going to stop there so we can begin today. So a little bit what I mentioned before, so briefly, what's well-being? We're going to see many different definitions, and what is interesting with well-being is like they hold a meeting, I think in early last year, all the kind of the minds behind well-being research to really agree on the definition, because if you read different papers of well-being, every person is defining the concepts differently. So they finally agreed to something to share, and we're going to share that with you. We are going to look at some well-being dimensions that you can start using also to assess more or less how is your well-being, some alternative perspectives on well-being, and then some techniques on how can you start boosting that. The interesting thing with the concept of well-being that now I forgot this one. Now seems to be like everyone is talking about well-being. So what is well-being? So to an extent, when Laura told me I'm going to be running a conversation at the Center for Design, talking about rest and well-being, I said, oh, that's super interesting. And we started talking about our own well-being, and we discovered a couple of things.
Yeah. So we tried to compare, Sheila and I tried to compare ourselves. So for example, for me, in terms of sleep pattern, I'm a night owl by nature. And I definitely need like 8 to 9 hours of sleep. And
I probably, as I started to grow older, I converted into an early bird. So I think it was like one of my jobs made me have to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. And since then, I just like changed my routine completely. And now I do go to sleep at 9. And after 6, I ignore everyone who calls me. And I'm up very early in the morning. So yeah.
Yeah. And then in terms of diet, I also am someone, I never had any rules really about, at least once I became an adult, I never had rules about like what to eat, what not to eat. I never had a strict diet, but I'm type 1 diabetic. So that means I have a lot of guidelines that I have to constantly think about and apply.
I've been probably for the last 25 years following a very strict gluten-free diet, just because the first 25 years of my life I was sick. And I just thought that was the way life was after you were eating. So since then I'm like very strict with my diet. So yeah, food and me are not designed to be.
And then in terms of a mindfulness routine, I'm someone that never had any real routines of any kind. I mean, these are things that I sometimes think, oh, I should do this or that more regularly, but I just don't.
I do have a 15-year practice in yoga and mindfulness. So I do wake up in the morning every single day, and I do all my routines and mindfulness and all those kind of things that no one wants to I do. And similar, I just jump to the physical activity. I also do have a very strict, if you want to like physical activity for like every day, rain and shine, I have to be doing something.
Yeah, and I also don't really have a set routine around physical activity. It is somewhat challenging, especially as a type 1 diabetic, to figure out like when I can do any kinds of physical exercise, what to eat before that, how to adjust the insulin pump for that purpose. I have this year gone to Pilates a few times, which I'm happy about. But I can go sometimes 9 months without doing any actual exercise aside from walking. And so, yeah, it's just another counterpoint. And I think the last two, it's like, I hate mornings. I'm not a morning person, and I hate structure.
Well, I had to be the opposite.
Surprise.
Right now, it's mornings are my most productive, and I'm a very flexible, structured person. You know what I mean? I do like a structure, but I like to adapt to the technical difficulties that we can have in life. So a little bit what we were trying to say is like we both approach our well-being in very different ways. And to an extent, the bottom line here is there's no one single definition of well-being which would apply to every single person. What works for me clearly doesn't work for her, and vice versa. So a little bit the invitation is starting to understand what is well-being and how can each of you identify what works for you based on what literature or studies have started to identify as contributing factors of well-being. And to an extent, if you start looking at what research says, well-being is briefly defined and how positive you feel generally and about life overall. So the positive part is the subjective part. Positive for one person may not be positive for the other. And what's interesting is like everything counts from how you experience everyday emotions and the different things you do, and also how you reflect about your purpose in life, your goal, your meaning. What is interesting about the research is like, overall, if you compare research on well-being and emotional well-being with research on other fields, it's a lot very new. I would say probably 20, 30 years. And interestingly, if you start looking at that, it has always been followed similar methodologies, which are quantitative longitudinals based on data sets, sometimes not collected for the purposes of analyzing well-being, but just collected for something else that later has been used for well-being. Those populations are also quite homogeneous, which means they share similar characteristics. And why is that? Most of the research on well-being has the purpose to help populations be healthier, not specific individuals, which to an extent is great for policies, but it doesn't to an extent account for the uniqueness of each person or the unique conditions that each of us may have. There's very little qualitative or experiential research on well-being. And the last point on this is most of the research is on emotional well-being and not so much about the connection, which this is also more emerging between mind and body, and how even the effect of positive emotions, of positive well-being into the physical body. Now there's much more research on that. These are some of the common dimensions that if you start looking into the literature, you're going to see most of the studies are focusing on satisfaction with life, purpose in life, which is the other one, positive emotions. There are some, well-being is a complex concept and there are many different factors that impact the concept, but research tends to focus more on one than the other. Also, which means is the picture that we have is a little unbalanced. So if there are some areas of well-being that you would like to know more about, there's not so much research on that yet. Also, most of the research has been done in the Northern Hemisphere, so the States and European countries. So just take with a grain of salt all the different theories and frameworks. And on that note, one of the frameworks I brought to discuss a little bit is called the happiness pie theory. I don't know if you heard about that, but it was introduced in 2019 by a positive psychologist. Sonia is the first surname. Oh, Jesus. Yugonovsky. I'm really bad with names and pronunciations. But the interesting thing of this theory, which also has been challenged a couple of times and reviewed, is like she argues that there's a percentage of our happiness and optimism and well-being, which is genetically predetermined. And she went as far as saying like 70% of our genes determine whether we're going to be pessimistic or optimistic. And to an extent, there's nothing we can do about that. Mm-hmm. Some people are born optimistically happy, and you say, why are you happy all day? And some people are not. There's 15% of us, which is also determined by external circumstances. The job you have, where you live, you live in a small town, in a big city, in a crowded place, in a developing country. And there's 15%, the other 15%, that you have control over, which has to do with your resilience, with your motivation, with your grit, with your will of change, and different activities that you could do to an extent to revert or to minimize your genetical component. It does require a lot of effort, consistency, and commitment. So as you can see, some people are in favor of this theory, some other people are not, which to me is interesting to see. Is like, it's complex. But there's something we were talking with Laura yesterday. There's a lot that has to do with your commitment to change. And it's sometimes the hardest when it has to do with us. As we are great at complaining, but then when it comes to change, it's like it takes a lot of effort and consistency for a long period of time. Doing one thing one day won't change anything. So I think that's interesting.
I have a question. So in this model, does this presume neurotypical conditions, or is that 70% allowing for something like that?
So the very first version that she's shared was actually 40% genes. And then it was much more, I think it was 40% for intentional activities and the remaining for the other one. And then she revisited the model to realize that the genetic component is apparently much impactful than was originally envisioned. I don't recall everything about the study. I'm happy to share the paper with you. Yeah.
But I think that's a great point. It gets into the next slide, perhaps. Oh, and the next slide after that also, but this is the.
So, thank you. So just to move forward with this. So you're saying, okay, this is great, all this research. So how can I start understanding where I am, whether I'm balanced or not? What things actually impact my well-being, whether I'm happy or sad? So there are 8 wellness dimensions that impact technically how your well-being is.
Can I share just thoughts? Because I'm still on the previous one. So
Sure.
it's a big one. If we have like 70%, it's mostly like more of us is about the genes. And then what we can do is like a little small thing. It's a little bit depressing.
It's an optimistic is not. That means you're very
Yeah, I mean, if you're sad, that you're gonna be sad. You will be maybe
But then-
organized or.
But on the other hand, you can see it, the glass half empty. Yes, it's a small percentage. However, if you are a very determined person that you really want to change, well, you have to be as very consistent and very like committed to that change. It's not meant to be a negative statement. It's meant to be, okay, there's hope there. You just have to be committed to that.
But maybe I also think about the recent research about gut microbiome and how specific things can like ignite genes and also like changing structure, right? Like there is a lot about epigenetics and the way our environment affect and can like shoot out specific genes at specific moments because of stress or can make them more dormant. So I think there's also some there that probably needs some research.
We're gonna hope to work on the gene as well.
Because gene theories,
Yeah.
Gene
Also-
medicine.
A good
This is what we need.
This theory was done by a positive psychologist, which I don't think is a biologist. So I would be really interested to see how biologists also approach this theory. on
Because
those
it's
points.
a different field.
But she's not the only, I have heard this theory about 10%.
I mean, this is a really big thing. I mean, if it's the genes, then I mean, maybe the well-being will be just accepting who you are and not try to be like super happy all the time.
No, but that's exactly a point, and something we want to convey here is we do need to accept who we are, and sometimes we start to getting depressed or sad when we start comparing
Yeah,
to others and try to be like them.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, this is how I am, this is who I am, these are the things. I don't like mornings, and that is okay. And there's no kind of a rigid way for well-being. And all these 8 dimensions here is for you to start understanding. It's all about self-awareness and understanding who you are, what works for you, and how can you start controlling things rather than things controlling who you are.
Yeah.
And on that note, from these 8 that we are going to come later, I just want to focus on 3 of them, which I think are important for you to start thinking about. The first one is about the spirituality, which also emerged from the human provision study, which is a recent study published last year, which actually, it points to self-awareness, it points about reflection and being in the present. Some of our unhappiness comes because our minds are thinking about tomorrow, later today, what's going to happen in the future. If we really master how to be present and think about, okay, what is happening today? How am I feeling now? And also the fact that the spirituality is one thing. I mean, spirituality is, broadly speaking, you can be a religious person or not, but the fact that it's not only about you and you're not the center of everything, but you're also connected to something bigger than yourself. And sometimes placing your attention beyond yourself is a good way to cultivate your well-being, because that deflects a little bit the self-focus.
Sheila, you sound like a Buddhist.
I did say I have a lot.
Yeah, it's on your mindfulness. It sounds more like you're a Buddhist. Okay.
I'm not saying all this is easy. I'm just saying it's,
Yeah,
I think it's.
I love it. No, I think it's great. No, but I'm seeing the Buddhist connection.
The second finding that emerged from these studies is the role of social connections. It's not about having 1,500 friends, but not to be alone, or not to go through life completely alone, but really cultivate high quality connections, one person, two people. And one of the main studies, I remember sharing this with my husband, and he said, I don't believe it. That's not true. Apparently loneliness, which loneliness is the feeling of being completely alone, even if you are surrounded by people, could be as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it has a really strong component and emerged one of the biggest contributors to unhappiness and loneliness in the world. So cultivating any sort of social connection, try to talk with one person every day, even the barista in the cafe, someone to make some sort of
That
connection.
counts?
Any sort of face-to-face connection counts more than virtual, and that counts more than that. Sometimes
Okay.
we spend days with this working from home without talking with any other person.
Uh-huh.
That's very detrimental for our mental health.
Okay, so going to,
So go for a walk,
go for a walk and you're saying hi,
smile, to
smiling, that counts.
that counts.
But the idea of being completely isolated is
We are
bad.
social creatures.
Okay,
We can be more extroverted or more introverted.
now that's interesting to know.
Interesting.
Because I was thinking about individuals that don't have families or don't have kids and how they, or people that are senior citizens and how they would sort of have a social connection. You know, especially now where everything's connected digitally first before it's in person.
And it's also connected to spirituality, because you're connected to a community, connected to something.
Right.
I mean, I think, oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that yes, the longest study of longevity in Harvard is about they studied for so many years, like what is the thing that makes us more live better, have better health, and it was the quality of our relationships, and they explained the evolution, right? Like we are social animals and we develop in society, and that's how we evolve to be kind and to support each other, and so therefore that is like the single most impactful indicator of health.
But also pets. I mean, I think pets play a big role.
Yeah.
If you're lonely, having a pet, because a pet, you know, maybe even like a social robot, although I'm necessarily go there right now, but you know, something that you are socially engaged with is really about yourself, right? You're talking to the cat or the dog, right? And it's about you being social.
And you're not only focusing on you,
Yeah.
but also trying to make the pet not to die. So you're also like
It's giving you a purpose. It's giving you a
Does
purpose.
a chatbot count?
I am anti-technology, but some people I don't.
We have to study that.
Why is it necessary to see the person, not to talk to person? You're saying that online.
Because we express much more with our facial expression
if it's video
and
call.
body. So Steven Pinker just published a book called Conversations or something along those lines, where he really explains all the different things, but we express many more cues physically than on a screen. It also depends whether you have met the person before, how many times before, or whether it's the very first person you meet, the very first time you meet the person. There are many other different things.
Yeah. Also in online communication, certain types of expressions are kind of suppressed. So it's much more likely that you just agree with someone if you're in an online conversation versus like voice, like some maybe disagreement or unhappiness. You're more like, so it's kind of skewed, and it's not like the same as if you bump into somebody and you say, oh, actually, I'm not feeling great today,
Just the fact that you can touch the other person and hug them. Have you ever had an argument over Zoom? It's super annoying. You can't do that. Yeah, it's like, but if you are in person, it's like, okay, it's fine. It's a different dynamic.
It can go deeper.
And I read somewhere that just having eye contact with someone for 10 minutes, just looking at them for 10 minutes in the eye, that creates a bonding effect. I don't know if that's true, but just having that eye contact for that duration of time creates this.
I don't know the 10 minutes, but yes, the eye contact. Steven Pinker also talks about
Yeah.
how little eye contact we do, and actually because we never do eye contact because we don't think
Right.
Yeah. So the last one, which is about physical activity. Physical activity, I'm not pointing to running a marathon, but just moving. We live in an amazing digital society where we spend at least more than 7 hours sitting per day. And probably we are all guilty of this, with the phones, or the laptops, or the computers. And that triggers a lot of different physical issues in the body, but also being sedentary, so not moving, also affects the mind and emotions. And something that I found fascinating are the benefits of physical activity for both, for the mind and body. So the head on the right is when you are sitting, you can see the activation of the brain. So more blue means the brain is inactive. Less blue is the brain is more active. So after 20 minutes, even after walking, not even running, you can see how much more active the brain is, how much more oxygen you have. So the more you move, also the more you increase your cognitive abilities, you can learn more, you can make decisions in more sharper ways. So we sometimes associate physical activity with having a killer body or being amazingly looking, but it also has a really strong correlation with cognitive tasks and demand. So my education is move from the chair, do something. Equally important is to sleep. So sleep is not also because we love beds, but also it's the moment where our brains recover and grow. And there are three things. It's not only about the quantity of hours, but it has to do with regularity, which has to do with going to sleep at the same time and waking up at the same time. The more regular you can be, the more rested you are going to be. You know what? Sometimes during the weekend we throw everything and we go to sleep at midnight because we went partying. That actually throws you off more than you think it does. And also the quality. The least amount of times that you wake up during the night, the more rested you're going to be. So the more times you wake up, the more bad your rest time is going to be.
Great. So I wanted to introduce a couple of alternative perspectives on well-being, just sort of challenging, in a way it's about the social construction of why do we think certain things about well-being. I think certain of the examples we just shared are sort of common sense, and you'll hear them all the time, like you should go walking every day, or you should try to sleep certain hours. However, in the disability literature, especially the artist and activist Joanna Hedva, who has a recent book called How to Tell When We Will Die, asked this question: what exactly is supported, even strengthened, under the regime of the singular story that tells illness as a temporary aberration to a fantastical norm of wellness that asserts we are sovereign individuals dependent on no one? The definition of the body that I like most is that it's anything that needs support. It's a human body that needs food, rest, sleep, shelter, care, other humans. It's a social body that needs to be propelled and maintained by a collective's aims, the tension of many convergences and disagreements coalescing into a whole. And I think in that definition, you see some, kind of similarity or convergence, maybe with some of the things that we just presented, but also a kind of a critique, right? Of we see a lot, at least let's say just in American society, like influencers on social media promoting certain kind of well-being schemes or activities. And from a disability perspective, I think the main point here is that disabled people, by definition, are living, continually with illness, or like for myself, like type 1 diabetes. So it's like the perspective is that, well, and I think this goes to Todd's question as well, right, about neurodiversity, is that if one is living, in a condition that is not considered like the norm, but yet a critical disability lens says, but yet there's a lot of pride in living with disability, that disability is not a lack of something, it is a extension of what it means to be human. So essentially, that means that we have to almost reverse how we're thinking about well-being as well. Another example of this is Rebecca Monteleone's new book, The Double Bind of Disability. And she writes about, she has different chapters about different topics, but one is around type 1D. And she writes, in contrast to the management of illness in the body, she writes, it is within this CRIP space that generative possibilities emerge, not just in the technology, but also reimagining diabetes as a collective, collaborative experience. And that's one of the points that we really wanted to make with this workshop, is that part of what's important here is connecting individual growth and transformation with communal growth and transformation. And that also has to do with like literally physically coming to this room for this workshop. It's about being together. You know, it's not just about like, can I learn some new technique to improve my abilities? It's being together is the thing that allows us to potentially reimagine society differently as well.
So before going into activities, we just wanted to share a few resources in case you wanted to go more in depth in some of the concepts. So the Good Life is all a summary of the research. The one that she was talking about is the longest study on happiness that happened at Harvard for 85 years. It was published last year. The Hub of Happiness is the lady who came up with the pie theory. If you want to read more about the book, Atomic Habits, James Clear, he has a website, very good, with each one newsletter. And I can keep going, but I'm just going to say you can read the rest. The Rest Fest Film Festival, if you want to check it out, has quite a few events on mindfulness, meditation, and resting online.
And then we're going to add a couple of things that I teach in the Design Futures class or draw on in various ways. And these are, you know, going more towards that concept of transformation, you know, connecting individual growth with alternative possible futures in society as well. And so these are a couple of books that came to mind. The Future is Disabled, Pleasure Activism, Flash Forward, and How to Future. So starting to just connect personal growth with collective change.
Any questions before we dive into some of the activities?
Do you see a role for design in all of that, I guess? It's something that we will address later, or not just to know?
I think design, I think it's also interesting to first think about designers are people as well. And thinking about their own, because sometimes we forget that we designers are people and we're humans as well, and we have our own well-being. And perhaps thinking about how much influences your own well-being in the designs that you do. That could be one way, because there's a connect direction between our moods, our emotions, and how we behave in the world, the designs that we do, and the work that we do. And I think many designers, when they are even designing for well-being or for health, they don't even think about all the literature or any of the concepts we have been touching on. So they also need to start understanding these things first.
Yeah, and I would say definitely also in the Design Futures class, students in the past that I've taught both at the Institute of Design and also here at Northeastern, students have said to me sometimes when they work on a topic that is like deeply important, like personally, so students with certain identities and they're working on something specific around that, and they will say at the end of the class, I learned so much about myself, and then they also contributed to like this reimagining of society. So that connection also I think is really valuable.
And I would say that you also design your life, right? Like you have here like these sort of different parts, and as a designer, you can design for others, but then you can also design your schedule. You can design your environment. You can design things around it to be more conducive to the life you want to live. And so I think everyone can become a designer of well-being.
I think it's a good point, because something we're going to start working now is like, even we as designers, we don't take the time to think about us and what we need to work better, to be better people, to function better in everyday life. And because I think even more in the West and even more in the States, for someone who did not grow up here, this is mindset of we have to be doing. Productive. And I think there's no time, can you just sit 5 minutes and do nothing? And I really challenge each of you to be 5 minutes doing absolutely nothing. I don't even think if I can be 5 minutes. And sometimes we don't realize what we want, what we don't want, which areas need more work, why we are struggling to design something, why we are struggling to do something else. So the first activity is meant literally to take a pause in your daily busy lives and look to yourself, start to self-reflect a little bit. And I think you all have it with you. Can you start thinking about kind of discovering a little bit who you are and what do you need? And it's about what are the things that you love doing, and go away from the cliches. No one is going to receive money or a prize if you write what everyone is expecting you to write. The goal is like, can you take the next 10 minutes for yourself and take this a commitment to the exercise to see what can I learn new about myself that I haven't done or I haven't thought about that. So there are 4 parts to the very first exercise is what are the things that you love? From eating ice cream and drinking coffee in the morning to quantum computing and AI and design. What are the things that you're good at? And it's okay to say sleep. If you're really good at sleep, I'm crap. That's it.
Favorite
There's a question that says, what does the world need? That points to what's your wish for the world? Do you want a world more just? And also for you. What is your wish for your own personal life? And the last bucket is, what do you need to focus in on? There are always things about us that we need to focus on and we never make the time. Can we start acknowledging those things?
And I'll just add one short thought. I think this is also quite a bit about design for diversity or design for difference, like human difference. Mm-hmm. And one thing I've been thinking about a lot more is taken again from disability studies, but it's thinking about your access needs or your accommodation needs. So you might have heard the word like disability accommodations or what are the things that someone needs. And I was having a hard time thinking about this myself, but then when I go to conferences, I often will realize how ill-fitting the typical conference schedule and venue is for my needs. So it's like, I can't find the foods I need. I can't eat at the times I need. I can't take enough time to eat. And that happens for everyone, certainly. But then, if you have certain access needs, it becomes doubly or triply important to think it through. So I would even ask yourself, like borrow from disability studies and say, do you have access or accommodation needs to make the world fit for you better? Yeah. I think we're going to now take, how many minutes did we say? About 10 or 15 minutes?
Let's say 10.
I don't know, 10? Okay, maybe 10.
Let's see how we go with 10.
Yeah, let's see how we do.
This one, right?
Yeah.